Well, hello friends, and welcome to another Ask Zach. Today we're going to talk about the high lonesome Telecaster sound of Vince Gill, or the songbird of the Telecaster. So certainly one of my favorites. We're going to talk a bit about his history as a player, his gear. We're going to do a little lesson at the end, kind of show some Vince Gill isms. And of course, as always, there's a Vince Gill Spotify playlist with some of his best, solos and stuff through the years. And, as always, if you've been enjoying the show and you haven't subscribed yet, well, please go down in the corner. And then we have a new offering, as we've had a lot of people asking how they can support the show on a regular basis. So, of course, we have, merch, and we have, the tip jar, but we now have Friends of Ask Zach, where you can sign up and you can donate to the show monthly. So if you want to check that out, go to askzach.com. All right. Back to the show. So I was first exposed to Vince on Hee Haw many years ago. It was in the 80s. It was when Vince was still on RCA. He had not really had a hit at this point, and he was playing his 53 blonde Telly, and it had a big sticker over here. And it's since, of course, the sticker is long gone, but I don't know if he was influenced by Clarence White to put a sticker on his Telly or what. But he had two Silverface, Fender amps, and he had that Telly, and he did an Oklahoma Borderline, and I thought he was great. And then didn't hear anything from him for a while. And then in 1989, he showed up again, but this time it was completely different. There was a music video, and he was standing in this house and singing this really beautiful, country ballad called When I Call Your Name. And I immediately went out and bought the album. And, I thought it was great, but it didn't have a whole lot of guitar playing on it. And I was a little disappointed in that. It had Rita Ballou, which is an old Guy Clark tune that he had cut. And Never Alone had some cool kind of twin guitar stuff that was, of course, more in a kind of a Larry Carlton kind of vein. But it wasn't until his next album came out called Pocket Full of Gold that he really caught my attention. And one of the tunes, Liza Jane, was, got a lot of video play and a lot of airplay, and I just loved his playing on that. The other tune on the album that really floored me was the, Take Your Memory With You, which that's the solo I opened the show with. And I love that guitar solo. And also I love that tune because that's a tune I played a lot back in Texas in the early 90s with my friends. They're all a bunch of, this is playing like dance halls and things like that back when people danced and things. And I always loved playing a Texas shuffle, and I loved playing Take Your Memory With You. And actually wasn't until recently that I actually figured out the solo. So I always used to just kind of improvise my own thing, but playing that, learning that really made me have even greater respect for Vince's playing. And another thing that doing this episode really made me realize how much Vince Gill has influenced my playing, and just the way I, play, and the way I look at the Telecaster and the tones that I like. And so this is fun. So I think the other thing that really caught my attention, besides the Pocket Full of Gold record, was there was a Mark O'Connor album called The New Nashville Cats, and they did a song called Restless. It was an old Carl Perkins tune. And on it you have, of course, Mark O'Connor, but you also had Ricky Skaggs, Steve Wariner, and Vince Gill, all singing and playing together. And I have to admit, as much as I loved, Ricky and Steve's parts, it sounded like they made them plug in direct or something like that. Because all of a sudden you'd hear Vince's guitar, and it just had this kind of wonderful, rubbery, twangy sound that just, floored me. Funnily enough, in the video, he was playing this strange Valley Arts guitar. So it was kind of like a guitar that Larry Carlton played, like on the cover of On Solid Ground. It was similar, except it was actually full scale instead of being Gibson scale, and had EMG pickups. It was a dark, kind of brown mahogany looking thing. Pardon me. But anywho, I think he was actually using his 53 Tele on the recording. But yeah, he really kind of got me hook, line, and sinker. Then you had his appearances on the American Music Shop, and those took it even further, because then on the American Music Shop he had Vince had Albert Lee with him, and them doing Liza Jane and swapping solos back and forth. And Albert was playing his old Kubicki Tele with the B bender on it, and Vince was playing his 53 Tele. And yeah, that's a great show, and you can find that, it's available online, and you can really see, what Vince was playing through. He had, like a Silverface twin reverb with JBLs, and you can see he's got his pedals on top of his amp and everything, and we'll talk gear later. But yeah, and then, Vince just, really took off. He had a lot of hits, and he'll be the first to say that, it's his singing that, really brought him to the table. And of course his songwriting. And then, but I think I don't think he's underrated. I think at times he's a bit underappreciated as a guitarist, and just how good of a player he is, and just how sweet his bends are, and how tasteful he is, and how he sings and then his guitar sings. And it doesn't matter if it's a chicken picking kind of thing, or a thing where he's playing like Clapton or Knopfler or Larry Carlton, some of his heroes. He always kind of goes from singing, with his voice, and then singing with his guitar. So, had the thrill of working with Vince a couple of times. While, of course, working for Brad Paisley, I got to play on the Opry, and Vince came out and sang "Love's Gonna Live Here" with us, and that was a lot of fun to get to play with Vince. Then another one was, we went into the studio with Albert Lee, and it was Vince Gill, Albert Lee, and Brad Paisley, and I got to watch them, sit in a circle and play together, and that was a huge thrill. And I have to admit that Vince's playing was really stellar on there, and without making enemies or anything, I have to say that I think I enjoyed his solos the best on there, and his tone. So, yeah. So, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about his gear. Let's back up. I think during that era of the early 2000s, I really liked what Vince was doing. He had an album called Next Big Thing, and he was writing some with Big Al Anderson from NRBQ, and he had the song Next Big Thing, which was really cool, and it had Big Al playing rhythm on it. It was killer. And, working with Brad, we did a couple of award shows where Vince was either hosting it or part of it, and on a couple of those he had Big Al with the band and doing his thing. And that was a thrill. So both seeing Vince and seeing Big Al. So yeah, let's talk about his gear. Early on, of course in the Pure Prairie League he played his old black Strat Simon, his red 335, and played some Ovation acoustics and stuff on stage. And where I really, started to, of course, catch on to him was him playing like with Roseanne Cash and Rodney Crowell. And by that point, he was playing a Tele. He had like a blonde one with a white pickguard, and playing through a Silverface, twin, and had some Boss pedals on top. Looks like he was already starting to use a Boss compressor back then. Then, by the time, seeing him on Hee Haw and such, yes, you could see, the amp with pedals on it. It's funny, he didn't use a pedal board for a long time. And even on those American Music Shop episodes, again, you'd see the Silverface twin with JBLs in it. And then on top, you could see his Boss pedals. He had a blue Boss compressor, and a white, probably a DD3 or DD2, delay, and then he had the gray reverb pedal because evidently the reverb was out on his amp, and instead of fixing it, he just got a Boss reverb pedal. So, and sometimes you'd see a tuner up there, and that's kind of what he had. And sometimes he'd use two, twin reverbs and that 53 Tele. And I've gotten to, to check out the 53 Tele a couple times, and it's pretty light. It's it's got a really good feeling neck that's not huge, nor is it skinny, but it's not one of those huge, like baseball bat, necks like some of those guitars had, but none of them had necks as big as some of the ones that Fender decided to put on reissues. But yeah, and then he kind of moved on to using Rivera amps, and he used 200-watt Rivera amps with Celestion speakers in them for quite a while through the 90s, and even when we did a show with him, like it was the New York State Fair around 2003, 2004, he was still using that rig, but of course he had acquiesced to having a pedal board by that point, and by that point he had like a Zen drive and a Sparkle drive and a Boss compressor, and he had a Boss delay and a couple other things. I think interestingly enough, he had an EBS bass chorus that he seemed to leave on all the time at a very low setting and to split stereo, and so that way he just had this really subtle chorus going on all the time that you would never think, oh, he's got chorus on. But that was a interesting little thing to see. Then after the Rivera amps, he used two Blackface Deluxe reverbs for a couple of years, and then he started using a Little Walter amps. And of course, Little Walter, Phil Bradbury's a great guy, and had the pleasure of getting to hang with him some. He makes a great amp for Vince, and he uses the Little Walter amps whenever he does big shows, and but he tends to, like, if you would, back when he was still playing with the Time Jumpers, you would tend to see him use like a Swart amp plus a Blackface Deluxe reverb, or a Blackface Deluxe reverb plus a Tweed Deluxe or a Brown Deluxe. He would always bring two amps. I guess one was a backup, or maybe he was plugged into both of them at the same time. I never, went up and, put his gear under the magnifying glass. But I think as far as his, Teletone, one of the great tricks I learned from him was rolling the tone control down on the bridge pickup. So, today I'm using a Boss compressor. I'm using an old CS3 from the 90s that I've had forever, and I'm using my Boss DD2. And, of course, the Deluxe reverb with the Vintage 30. Bright cap has been clipped. 57 Esquire with Diodario 10s. And that's kind of what Vince, of course, on his 53 has tended to use Diodario 10s, though at times he's used a little heavier strings and gone back and forth, and medium pick. But, this is kind of my imitation of his bridge pickup tone. So this is with the tone control all the way up. And then if you just roll it back some, and I don't know how well that translates, on YouTube, but it's just taking off enough of that, kind of real high end that's slightly harsh, and it just smooths it out. And, with that and the compressor, you kind of get, and the delay going, you get a little bit more into that Vince Gill kind of sound. And then if I were to kind of try to play in his style, or think about the ways that he's influenced my playing, I think about these kind of things. So, I realized that like this kind of low string bend thing, and like in A, I had picked up from him, also using, kind of using open strings, and, like taking the D string, playing it open, and then fretting this one that. some of that's Albert Lee, but some of that's, Vince and his interpretation of Albert, because, Vince had to play a lot of Albert's licks when he played with Rosanne Cash. And I always felt like there was a lot of that era of Albert Lee that rubbed off on Vince, kind of like that "My Baby Thinks He's a Train." I always felt like Vince kind of took Albert from that era and kind of, and did his own thing with it. But there was a part of it where it was like Vince was almost a continuation of the old Albert Lee Telecaster sound. And Albert went on to playing Music Mans and other stuff. And so even like on that American Music Shop show, it was kind of like, okay, well, there's Vince, who's taken kind of, not stolen, but he's kind of taken some of Albert's, sound and vibe, and Albert's moved on to something else. And so it was interesting. Let's see, some other Vince Gill isms. You have that, like on Oklahoma Borderline, you have like that almost sounds like a Beatle lick. Or the this major third, minor third thing. Of course, the song's in G, Then the solo goes into C, and you have this. That kind of thing, and then, or this. Also these fun kind of open string things that he does. Which kind of comes out of this. If you think in G, you have this kind of Chet Atkins-y kind of thing. And that's playing off of a G6. But he's just taking the top two strings, and he's, and he's, doing these pull-offs on the top two strings. And so, again, if you look up, Oklahoma Borderline, you can hear him doing all these cool open string things. Another thing is his bending is just impeccable. And when I watched him recording with Albert Lee and Brad, Steve Fischel was producing it, and Steve was commenting on Vince playing like Clarence White. And Clarence White was another influence on Vince, especially with his string bending. And so he has these very exact bends that he does. Where he really bends exact, and and to where they're they're unisons. Yeah, you have that kind of thing like in the Liza Jane, solo. Yeah. So then going back to kind of what I played at the beginning, which was the Take Your Memory With You, which is in the key of E. It's a really beautiful solo, and he's playing out of a couple different, E, inversions, this. And yeah, it's just, and there's some really nice chromaticism, which I think, I guess it comes from Western swing, but it might come from Albert Lee also. But you have, the. Of course, it ends going into the 5 chord, into the B. Really pretty solo. And I think his bending really as with most players, I mean, you can really tell who it is by the way they bend, and he has a really sweet style of bending strings, and just a great tone on the guitar. So, there you have my little player spotlight of Vince Gill, who is just amazing, artist and player. It's really cool to see him out, with the Eagles and doing that thing. But I have to admit, I always enjoy seeing him on his own with his band, and he's always had stellar players. Back on Take Your Memory With You, it's funny, it was hard for me to find clips of him playing that solo because so many times in more recent years he just lets Paul Franklin play the whole solo, and I get it. Paul's of course an amazing steel player, and it's a shuffle, but I love that solo. But Vince has always had a stellar band. I mean, no matter what, he's always, he's had Jed Hughes and Tom Bukovac and Tom Britt and, just all sorts of guys playing in there. So if you ever, when all this craziness is over, make sure and go see Vince Gill. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.